And so, hi everyone, I'm Dan Pritchard, co-founder of Tech Southwest. We're a regional tech cluster organisation working to support the tech sector in many different ways across the whole of the southwest of England. We've got really interesting events today in 2 panels looking at this whole issue around tech and democracy on the first panel, and then AI and ethics and data on the second, and some wonderful guests on both panels. Quickly, there's a couple of things I need to mention. If you're not a member already of Tech Southwest, do join. It's free, and you simply go to techsouthwest.co.uk to get news and information and opportunities, things about the annual awards and events like this, that kind of stuff. We're always looking for people, ideas, panelists, etc. Another thing is worth mentioning, our new tech website, Southwest Tech Daily, which is swtechdaily.co.uk, which is a news site for the southwest of England, but also, again, opinion pieces and other things. We're looking for contributions around that. So that's and then a couple other bits and pieces I'll mention before I ask my panelists to introduce themselves. We've got 2 things coming up. So next week we've got Pitch Up, which is a live pitch event from our Tech Southwest Startup Studio cohort. So we've got 9 tech companies going to that in front of panels, including investors and others. And Joe will put the link in the chat around that. But yeah, we need an audience for that in terms of these are pre-seed, pre-funding stage companies. So all bright and fresh to face the world for the first time. And then in July, we've got an Insight Lab event, a series of business kind of workshops, various things happening around that. So we'll chuck them all in. You won't have time to look at everything, but the next thing coming up is that Pitch Up event, which is going to be seeing the latest crop of talent, companies from Cornwall to Bristol and Bath as part of that. Okay, so really pleased to have a really fantastic panel with us today, and me rattling on about other things has given everyone the time to kind of arrive on the panel, which is fantastic. And yeah, it's quite a big panel, which is great, but we can use the mute button on and off as required. But this first session is all around tech and democracy. Then we've got the second session around AI, ethics and data. Obviously, there's some overlap. And then there's a chance for everyone just to network. We can use the networking on the left-hand side, and we'll have session tabs set up. We can just jump on and talk to each other about this, how this, in terms of spin-off conversations, and just to connect. So I'm gonna, in terms of time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell everyone who we've got on this panel today. Okay, so really pleased. We've got Callum Cockburn, engineering student at the University of Exeter. Sean Buchan, researcher at Stop Funding Heat, and Sean can explain what that organisation is all about when we get to the discussion as well. Karin Rudolph, co-founder of Tech Ethics Bristol. Feyaza Khan, broadcaster, journalist, BBC Tech podcast co-host. Robert Hillier, communications expert, and again, TribeTech podcast co-host for Tech Southwest, and Peter Evans, former enterprise editor at Sunday Times and the editor of Southwest Tech Daily. So hi everyone, and also I think we're going to be launching a poll around asking a very basic question: is tech good for democracy? So that will be in the poll section. People can click on the right hand side, and we'll come back and look at the results on that as we go through this first chat. So that will be live, and when it's live, Joe will let everyone know on the chat. So let's start. So Karin, tell us about Tech Ethics Bristol Group. What do you do, and what motivated you to start that?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here today. So this is the first meetup of its kind in Bristol, and I believe possibly in the Southwest. One of the biggest motivation for myself and my co-founder to start this was to make the field of ethics applied to technology accessible to everyone. Mm-hmm. I feel that there is a huge amount of misconception and misunderstanding about the how we can apply ethics to think about the potential harms and unintended consequences of technology. We believe it's really important to make this knowledge accessible to everyone in a very inclusive and open way. And we're doing this, bringing together industry, academia, and the general public, so we can all discuss and learn about this, how we can incorporate technology, ethics into technology, to make sure we are creating and developing technology is beneficial for people and also for the environment. So we started 3 months ago. We already have more than 320 members, which is fantastic. And it's a mix, all the members are a mix of data scientists, business people, and also marketing people. So we are just starting, but we really want to increase our reach, starting perhaps getting more involved with business incubators and people actually developing technology today, and also working with the schools in our near future to make sure the next generation also gets some of this knowledge. All this meetup is free, and we have the commitment to make it always free. This is something we really feel passionate about it. We do it because we believe it's important. We don't get any money. We don't charge people. We're never going to do it. So it's really something we do because we believe it's extremely important.
Yeah.
Now, due to my background, I feel like it's also kind of responsibility for me to do it. My background is in sociology and philosophy, so I really feel it's important to try to make this knowledge available. And it's also part of a bigger project of mine called Collective Intelligence, which is a resource hub with free courses, articles, and book recommendations. It's open to everyone who wants to learn more about technology and ethics. And finally, just to say, I'm hoping to start producing some introductory courses on ethics applied to technology, especially for businesses. Yeah, you will hear about me very soon.
Thank you, Karin. It's a good introduction. Good to hear what's happening in the region on this small area. So I'm getting a bit. Karin, can you just put the mic on mute, just in case that's why it's happening? So I seem to stop now. Okay. So Callum, you're here. You're a student at the University of Exeter. We're teamed up with the University of Exeter for this event as part of their festival of discovery. And obviously, when it comes to tech, free speech, students, young people, campus politics, that is often thrust into the spotlight, sometimes for controversial reasons, sometimes good reasons. One of the kind of key areas around this is often big tech companies, better to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. So things happen, Uber, Google, copyright, conflicts of labor laws, that kind of stuff. Governments almost kind of struggle to create the laws to keep up when it comes to AI and other tech issues. I guess everyone will kind of agree around that. Robert's just come back from the G7 summit, so we'll hear from him and a perspective on that in terms of digital discussions that we're having now that probably should have happened 10 years ago in some of these areas. In terms of, it feels like there's this whole catch up. So what can we do, I guess, to help the digital engineers and the parliamentarians and the politicians coexist in this ecosystem and make something that is good for democracy?
Yeah, so I think first of all, one of the big things is at the minute, obviously I've just finished my engineering degree. I'm going on to do a master's afterwards, but there seems to be quite a negative stigma about, certainly I've seen it on around my colleagues on campus, about going into politics as a engineer, and if we look at the stats, in 2019 there were 48 MPs who had a tech or science-based background, and I want to pick up on one of them in particular, Chiol Mura, who is the MP for Newcastle on Tyne and the Shadow Minister for Science, Research and Tech. And when she first came into politics, she spoke about the fact that her family, her friends, her colleagues at where she was working at the time were trying to persuade her not to go into politics because it's kind of perceived as perhaps almost dirty compared to it. So I think that's a really important thing, is that to make them coexist, we need to encourage on both sides that they're able to join in with other things. I'm not explaining.
No,
words aren't working this morning very well. And particularly, I think Chi's case is really interesting because she was heavily involved in the telecoms industry. She worked as head of telecoms at Ofcom. So, really senior within this tech industry in the UK. But her colleagues were still trying to persuade her not to go into politics. Why is that happening, and what can we do to kind of encourage these tech leaders to get involved?
Yeah, because that divide is not healthy, is it? Thank you, Callum. I'll come back to you in a bit. So Sean, we could hear a little bit about your organisation, and I understand that you recently authored a report around the whole kind of spread of misinformation on Facebook with recommendations for the company in that area. When it comes to big tech, is it enough just to be about recommendations and sort of trying to do the catch up, or do we need hard policy and do we need it fast?
Loaded question. I like it. So just for everyone that doesn't know, the report we wrote was specifically on climate misinformation on Facebook, because it's something that's been relatively not as well tread as some of the other topics of misinformation recently. There's been a lot of reports on misinformation with public health, thanks to the COVID pandemic, as well as misinformation to do with political elections, hate speech, things like that. Facebook's doing woefully terribly on climate misinformation, but on the other hand, they're saying they're doing quite a lot on it. And we wanted to expose the difference in those two things by bringing together as many studies as we could find on this and sort of say they're not doing enough. The short answer to the question is no, recommendations are definitely not enough. Our report also has recommendations for activists, for governments, and for other researchers, etc. My personal view on this is that the largest tech companies are too big to fail, and we saw this with the banks in 2008 as well. They're now at such a size that regulation is the only option, and we got ourselves into this situation. It happened with banks, it's happening with tech now. And I think if we don't, and I know this is a cliche, but if we don't do something about the system that we're in, we can't expect anything different to ever happen. At the end of the day, Facebook's a private company, and it's going to put profits over the well-being of people first and foremost, because it's programmed to do so. That's just the way it is. So as much as they say that they're trying to help on things, I don't think anything will happen until you get decent regulation. And we saw last year that a number of Democratic senators wrote to Facebook, and then they finally actually did something about a loophole when it comes to climate misinformation, and they actually said, no, okay, opinions must be fact-checked as well. And although they framed it as, oh, well, this has always been the case, they actually changed their policy. They just didn't like to admit it. It's worth saying that I think we need to work with what we've got as well, because we don't have enough time with these sorts of things, particularly when it comes to climate change. And Stop Funding Heat is a campaign which is actually leveraging Facebook's profit model against itself, because what we do is we get activists to write to the brands that they know and love and say, do you want to be advertising next to climate misinformation, or in Stop Funding Hate's case, which is a sister organization, do you want to be advertising next to hate speech? And the answer of most brands these days is no, because they understand that it's a huge brand safety issue. And so if we can leverage enough activists and people to message the brands will take advertising away, and that's another way in which you can get Facebook to change.
And
so
this
this
as an enabler action, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. So so the platforms won't change by themselves, but we do have consumer power, and we do have power. We have voter and democratic power as well to pressure governments to do something about it.
Thank you, Sean. Really interesting. So jumping around. So Robert. So we're talking about regulation there. You have spent a few days down in Cornwall, but not on the beach, at the G7 summit for TribeTech on behalf of Tech Southwest and Southwest Tech Daily. So really, I haven't spoken to you since you've come back. So really interested to hear how that went, and what have we learned from the summit about tech regulation changes going forwards. Is it top of that agenda, or is it or not? What's your insight?
Yeah, so it's in there if you go looking for it. I think it's quite common with these summits that they get overtaken by domestic issues, and certainly in terms of all of the media briefings became either obsessed with Northern Ireland or obsessed with a kind of slightly vaccine straw man about IP waivers, which every single person was asked about, and nobody gave a response to, because it's not really within their gift to say so. I can certainly go through pretty quickly, actually, the kind of the important bits of the 25-page communique at the end, because the media hasn't really reported any of the tech bits in there. And I think, as you said, Dan, earlier on, should this have been done 10 years ago? Well, most of what's said in here probably could have been written 10 years ago, actually. The front page contains the phrase, "We are convinced of the potential of technological transformation for the common good in accordance with our shared values." So that's the overarching position statement. They've committed to invest in research and development. They think there should be a green and digital transformation. They've acknowledged, and this is impressive of them, that tech change is profoundly changing our labour markets. That's finally been recognised. And then there are lots of phrases like this. We want to work towards a trusted, values-driven digital ecosystem for the common good. We want to promote digital literacy. We want to use the evolution of new technologies that reflects our shared democratic values. One for Nemo actually here. We have noted new forms of decision-making where algorithms have entrenched or amplified historic bias. Possibly the most interesting thing that's said in there. There is, however, a future tech forum that's been announced as part of our presidency in September. And this is to, this will make us all sign up, facilitate the coherency of emerging tech ecosystems. And the meeting that the digital ministers had, they agreed to improve the flow of free data, get businesses to use more electronic transferable records, improve safety and counter hate speech, secure supply chains, and increase cooperation in digital competition. And then within the education bit, there was a commitment to improve women and girls representation within STEM subjects.
I guess at that top level, no one's going to sort of fight against that. And of course that could be, it could be a framework, it could be good, it could be empty words. It depends on the activity and action that follows from it at a nation level, which is one of the big. Feyaza, you're going to dive in there, are you?
I was just going to say that whole list just makes me feel utterly depressed, because we're having these conversations about, really how we can make sure that tech coexists in our society. And the government is talking, or world governments, all the governments are just talking about things that we should have talked about 2 decades ago. What on earth is going on? And what is the point of the G7? And also, when Callum said about how digital engineers are just not encouraged to go into the political sector, well, that's part of the reason, because everyone in it doesn't understand what the heck they're talking about.
And I think, Dan, as well, just to continue that point a little bit, I think trying to understand who the audience for these communiques are, they obviously take an awfully long time to write so everybody agrees, which is why I think often they end up saying nothing at all. But if you were on the management team of a large tech organization, you'd laugh at that in the same way you'd laugh about the announcement over being taxed on the eve of the G7. It's like this is a world in which we simply don't have to operate or have any understanding of or have to deal with at all, because they're over here talking about this stuff, and we're over here, setting up our own healthcare systems for our employees. That's kind of how much we how much we care. So let them get on with it, because they are so far behind and they're simply not able to move quickly enough to begin to keep up with where we actually are. That I think the audience is, well, I'm actually not sure the audience is, because obviously we as kind of educated lay people think it's ridiculous. People who don't know or understand aren't interested at all, and certainly most of the mainstream media haven't even touched upon any of this and wouldn't know where to begin in terms of asking those questions. And the big tech decision makers would find it quite comic that that there's an acknowledgement that changes may be affecting the labour market. What do Amazon make of that? I think it was a big hilarious thing to read from the G7 as well. So, so I think if you want to understand, on Callum's point, why people in positions of influence don't want to go into Parliament or become MPs, well, that's your reason, because you don't have any power, you don't have any influence, and they're paying conditions.
So Peter, there you go. So media is blatantly ignoring a lot of this, or doesn't understand it. It's not really. Former enterprise editor, Sunday Times, he's having a go at you.
Well, Southwest Tech Daily is not ignoring it, and I'd urge everyone to have a read through all the great content from Robert and others. And following on from what Callum said, Robert wrote a great piece ahead of the conference about the anomaly, or perhaps unsurprising anomaly, of all the decision makers, all the people who are putting this so-called regulation together having very little background in tech. So as has been the way for decades, or at least a decade, as we've spoken about, these decisions are being made by people without a background in technology, which can't be a particularly healthy thing. I broadly agree with Robert. The communique itself didn't have any cut through anywhere. It never does. It gets overtaken by events, by what's sort of on the agenda that day. Not surprising, perhaps slightly depressing. From a Southwest perspective, my response to the conference was a mixture of pride and relief. I think we've been quite negative so far, but so that's a bit of positivity. It did showcase Cornwall and the Southwest at its best. That was great to see. I had some relief that nothing really bad happened. I think lots of other people probably
bad happened, yeah.
Probably had that reaction. But my sort of overriding response is that the hard work starts now. Really, we ran a story on the website about the need to forge a legacy from this conference, to capitalize on some of the agenda which perhaps wasn't was on the agenda but didn't get that cut through that we were talking about, the sort of sustainability goals, the desire to use tech for good, for progress, and that's all areas that the Southwest is really strong in. So what we need to do now, and there was a report from Pennon, the Southwest water owner, saying this, what we need to do now is capitalize on that by building a sort of green jobs boom, by increasing investment in infrastructure, both in terms of transport and connectivity, and build from here. So the G7 was what it was. We could have sort of predicted a lot of this ahead of time, and we actually did in some cases. But really, what we got to do is start the hard work now.
Yeah, and in terms of starting the hard work now, I think one of the interesting things about this is that we have as individuals, we are we use technology, digital natives. It's just there. It is just part of that. And actually, people see so many benefits around that. And Feyaza, coming to you, I guess, as a sort of journalist, the tech tools that we now have, in terms of tech and democracy, live footage from frontline protests, Black Lives Matters, the Arab Spring uprisings, that's a whole new narrative, viewpoints only possible because of technology. And when you've got that in the mix at the same time as what corporates are doing, big organizations, it is so huge, it is so complex, fundamental to kind of our lives. It almost, I guess that's why you have to sort of break it down and start looking at different areas. But those kind of benefits, aren't that part of the debate as well?
Yeah, they're definitely part of the debate, and we know that it's true that we wouldn't be able to get the input into Syria and Libya and in Egypt that we had. But then, these tools are also used for propaganda, and they can be. I'm thinking of Vladimir Putin on horseback. Some of the early examples: the Syrian president Bashar al-Assad visiting an orphanage and playing with babies as he killed children with chemical weapons on the other side of the country, and then places like China and the UAE blocking certain tech so information can't get out, and also so they hold a monopoly on that tech. If it's things like WhatsApp, because you can't even make a WhatsApp call to Dubai because it's banned, because they don't allow that. So then the tools are also, able to be manipulated. We can manipulate video and then just put it out on Twitter. The New York Times reported that there were certain videos that were enhancing the capabilities of Hamas. So that fueled the conflict in Palestine, and then attacks on Palestinians because they thought they had more weapons than they did. And then subsequently, the retaliation onto the Israelis. So this misinformation that Sean talked about is happening here too, in serious conflict situations. And that does need to be monitored. I know Facebook has created some sort of monitoring place where they have, Hebrew journalists and Arabic journalists, and they're just monitoring all of everything that's being said on social media. But they're a tech firm. Is that even their job? So this is again why we have to have leaders understanding what this all is about and how to enforce these things.
Yeah, totally. So Karin, if you're there, coming to you. So we've got to the stage where regulation, is essential, but the tech companies are so powerful, bigger than countries in many cases. That how do we start to address that balance of power when it comes to technology? Is it through activism? Is it through political change? What is it?
Well, I would say there are a few things to consider. First of all, in my view, I see technology mainly in its kind of political dimension, which is way beyond its technical aspects. Having said that, I don't think this has a clear division between technology companies and governments. In many, many cases, the same governments, they realized long time ago they can also benefit from the huge amount of data, behavioral data that's been extracted, is constantly being extracted from us, and also the constant surveillance we are under. So I think it's not necessarily tech companies and governments. In many cases, they work together. I think that's the first consideration. Secondly, because these things are happening, I see something which is quite concerning in my view, and it's one of the tech companies are now somehow behaving like states. You know, they are starting regulating aspect of our lives and controlling our behavior. And I think that is a really difficult place to be. I mean, they can do it because they have a huge amount of information. They know all about us, everything we do, we think, every aspect of our lives has been is analyzed constantly. So I think that's a really bad place to go, and especially because we're talking about very complex aspect of society. This involves ethical aspects, economic aspects, and loads of other things. Like the tech companies, they don't have an understanding of the political and societal processes. So I think that's a really dangerous place, and also because there are main motivations to increase profits. So it's not, we can't just say they're going to be seeking common good. On the other hand, I see this tendency, this trend can also lead to some type of personalization model, which is we're seeing now already is happening with advertising. But I think if we carry on like this and we keep asking technology companies to self-regulate, which is happening now, we keep asking them if they can control themselves, if they can create their own almost law. I think that is a really difficult place, mainly because we need to start asking what's going to happen with our fundamental rights, what's going to happen with freedom, democracy, privacy, equality. Are they also going to be personalized? And I think it's a risk we enter in this dynamic when we do certain things. Like it happened in China already, but yeah, it's a different mixture there. But if we do things so our consumption habits are a specific one, we can gain access to the specific things instead of being something controlled as usually has been traditionally by the state. So I think there are some risks there. Now, are we lost? I would say no. I'm optimistic, and I truly believe that we can use technology to increase political participation and political activism. But we also need to understand, and this is possibly one of the biggest challenge for us, for every society, we need to understand how technology companies are making decisions, how technology works, how all these things are happening, because we don't have access to any of those things unless you work in a big tech company. Usually you are a receiver all these decisions, but you can't take any action. So I think we need to really a society level to start pushing for regulations, not to the tech
companies willingly opening up their doors to that level, can you? Because they're in a competitive market, and they've been created to compete in a competitive market. So that is one of the big challenges. It's really interesting looking at the poll. Is tech good for democracy? It's a complete split in terms of those who've taken it. You know, a third say absolutely, a third say sort of, a quarter say not sure, and 10% now I'm inclined to think not. No one says no, hell no. But you know, and because we're coming from personal perspective mixed in with bigger picture around this. I mean, some of this, Callum, from your side, you know, is it about breaking up? Do you think, you know, you've grown up with these tech companies just there as part of the fabric of society? Is that the way it is, or do you think, you know, it's time to start to break up these kind of corporations, or is it just too late for that?
I definitely think that we're at kind of a balancing point at the minute. It can go one way or another, and if we don't take action, these companies are just going to get bigger and bigger. An example of that is Amazon with Diapercom, an online business, and Amazon changed the prices of diapers in their store, reduced the prices down, reduced the value of Diaper.com, and then they bought it at a vastly reduced price from where it was a year before. so as these companies get bigger, it gets easier for them to gain a foothold in different markets. We've seen it with Facebook buying up Instagram, and we know that Facebook was looking at that avenue for many, many years. How do they expand into that market and kind of prevent another one of themselves growing up almost? And I also think Karin's point is really interesting about not ignoring the fact that governments have a responsibility to use tech positively as well, and we haven't always seen that. We certainly, at the minute, there's many cases, as Karin mentioned. Another one from the UK, the NHS digital GP data research move, and that's all being run by Palantir, that the government's contracted out to do it, which obviously was involved in the Cambridge Analytica issues back in 2016. So we've got to be really aware that we can't just go, even if governments could regulate fast enough, we've got to be aware that they might not always want to regulate fast enough, because it is a benefit to them. It helps them to achieve their goals.
Absolutely. I think that's the point. I think that's what I'm saying. I don't see a clear cut between these two things, and I think governments are using actively those surveillance mechanism technologies are using. So I don't think it's necessarily, that's why I think it's our kind of role as a citizens to really try to do as much as we can. But we can't do anything if we don't understand what's happening. For many, many people, things like AI, they are mysterious forces, basically. I mean, we can understand something, we can't do anything about it.
Well, we're interesting because the next panel, we've got some experts on working in tech, in AI specifically, and and what's fascinating around all this is, there are so many, as people are putting in the chat, there are many examples of the incredible things that tech enables us to do. In terms of healthcare, in terms of medicine, in terms of how we communicate, in terms of technology, in different industries, climate change. Tech is going to be absolutely fundamental, around, and it is. So we have to recognise that at the same time as probing and questioning. Peter, you're going to say something there?
Well, I just very briefly, 20 years ago, the biggest companies in the world were GE, maybe ExxonMobil, a couple of oil companies. Now it's Amazon, Facebook, the FANGs. 40 years ago, it was whatever. I don't know, some retailer, probably some sort of bricks and mortar retailer. In 20 years' time, does anyone really think Amazon will still exist in its current form, Facebook in its current form, or will somehow regulation have found its way to break it up, and something will have filled that void? I think if you look at the sweep of history, the state generally sort of prevails, sadly.
Well, yeah, but in this sense, there's a view across this panel is that the state needs to prevail more or less. Sean, you're nodding your head in response to that. Do you want to build on that comment?
It seems inevitable that the tech companies will be regulated. It's just how soon is it going to be, and will they be one step ahead by the time that happens? Will they have found something else to monetize and to stay one step ahead of the game? Who knows? It's hard to know what's going to happen in 10 years because I wouldn't have predicted. I started activism on social media 10 years ago, and I would never have expected that social media platforms to have developed into what they've become. It would seem like the internet was such like a weird and wonderful and strange place 20 years ago, and it was like a source of creativity and interest and kind of crazy weird stuff. And now the only place that seems to happen is Reddit, and even that's fueled by algorithms. So, like, I don't know. Maybe we can bring the internet back to that, but we'll see. I'm interested to find out.
Yeah, it's like Pandora's box. Robert, yeah, okay. We're running out of time. Robert.
I should be very quick. I think the difficulty is it's hard to regulate what you can't see. And I think that if you look at the kind of made-for-TV extravaganza that the G7 was, they feel most comfortable when they're pointing at things and holding things, whether it be lifting up a solar panel or pointing at a drone or looking at a rocket. That's the world in which they still feel happy. Very difficult to regulate esoteric concepts. They don't get.
They ignore borders.
An office owned by somebody in a way that they traditionally understand. So I don't agree to sum up.
Brilliant. Look, no, thank you, everyone. I mean, I think it's really interesting, and it just shows, you know, the conversation, the discussion going so many different areas around this. You know, what is clear that, you know, regulation is key. Therefore, pressure on politicians, and who are our politicians and who are our councillors, and the cultural divide between tech and governments. You know, you look at the average age of an MP in the UK, that kind of thing, and they're not going to be digital native in the same, you know, in terms of the people setting up tech companies today and doing their thing. So those cultures, you know, we need to educate, we need to collaborate, we need to work together, we need to find common purpose. It is, you know, and I think the other thing, really interesting thing around this is it's in terms of tech and democracy, it's at every level. It is global, it is continental, it is nation, it is regional, it is local, it is, you know, my mum sends me petitions all the time to sign up to, in terms of get involved in this, get involved in that, and she's in her 80s and is using her iPad to engage and be a political activist in a very different way that she was in the 1960s, but she's still passionate about it. So, you know, there's so many different facets to this, but we've run out of time. So I want to thank everyone on this first panel. Thank you, Callum, thank you, Karin, thank you, Feyaza, thank you, Peter, Sean, and Robert. Really interesting views and thoughts, and we're just touching on some of these points. Do stick around for the second panel that Feyaza is hosting, and we're going to hear some of the positives as well, and as well as some of the dilemmas around AI and data and ethics. Let's keep putting questions and thoughts and ideas into the chat, and then at the end there's about 15 minutes where we can, people including the audience, can jump on screen, or you can go into the networking zone and just have one-to-one chats with everyone as well. So thanks, everyone. The next step is to click on the session tab on the left-hand side, where Feyaza is going to be racing off there now to set up panel number 2. And I think Robert's on that panel as well. And then Feyaza will kind of take over that point. So thanks, everyone. See you on panel 2, and then see you in the sort of chat and jumping on screen for the final 10-15 minutes. And thanks, everyone, to the audience for all those questions and things. See you in panel 2.